This video includes an ad for Squarespace. Sometimes in life, you get an opportunity that you just cannot say no to, even though it might come at a slightly inconvenient time. And a few weeks ago, I got one of those opportunities. I got an offer to purchase a machine that I've been dreaming about for years. And to be honest, I'm not sure I'd be making YouTube videos today if it wasn't for that exact machine. Let me explain. So I studied industrial design here in Oslo, Norway, and that school had an amazing workshop. So naturally, I spent as much time as possible in there. They had a separate woodworking, metalworking, plastics workshop, 3D printing workshop, and a lot of the skills that I know today, I picked up in those workshops. But that's not the point. The point is that during my time studying there, we had this one elective course where we had to make a short film. So I decided to make a film about making a pen. And I made that pen with a lathe. Actually, the exact lathe that we're gonna be purchasing today. Essentially, we could make a short film about anything that we wanted. We had a week to do it. I spent the first couple of days making this pen on the lathe because by then I'd figured out that lathe was hooked up to a separate power supply, so I could stay there in the middle of the night and work longer hours and have fun, whatever. Not the point, don't tell anyone. So basically, I spent the first day making a pen on the lathe, I filmed it, and then just spent another week editing and adding motion graphics and playing around in After Effects and just having a good time. Now, as a part of that assignment, we had to upload that video to Vimeo, and that video actually ended up getting like 140,000 views on Vimeo back then. This is in like 2012 or 13 or something. Oh, and fun fact, the reason why I got that many views is that my buddy Anders, which also now has a YouTube channel, sent that video to a bunch of magazines, which some of them featured the video, and that's why I got all that traction. And me getting so much attention for that video on Vimeo sort of sparked my naive belief in my abilities to make videos, I guess. I actually uploaded that video to YouTube as well. It's super old, you can watch it, I'll link it up there. But I kept making videos until I eventually ended up doing this full time, which is now what you're watching today. So now, back to this lathe, and why it was at a slightly inconvenient time the offer to purchase it came. I got the call about that lathe literally the week after I plugged that thing in. So this is my big Harrison manual lathe that has been sitting here for the past 2.5 years, not plugged in, on a pallet, super easy to move. And then the week after, we renovate this entire workshop and finally get it put down on the floor, installed, hooked up, everything works. That's when I'm offered to buy this other one. And of course, I can't say no to that, but getting it in here is gonna be easier said than done. So after watching a bunch of videos on how to move a lathe, I eventually came over one by Tom Lipton, Ox Tool, where he has like a set of wheels that he can bolt onto or underneath a lathe and then super easily wheel around. I figured that was a really good idea, so I decided to make my own version of that. The guys at school were nice enough to let me both purchase some material and use their metalworking workshop. So using the material that they had available as a reference, I quickly 3D modeled a contraption that would hold a set of 4 really heavy-duty wheels that would then get bolted underneath this lathe. And the process to make them was actually pretty simple. I then printed out a 1:1 scale of all the parts I would need to cut out, and then cut out all those drawings in the 1:1 scale, took them with me to the school workshop, glued them on to the material that they had there, and used the big saw to cut out all the pieces. Then it was a pretty simple matter of just putting all the holes where there were supposed to be holes and welding the whole thing together. Now the way that I've designed this whole contraption is that it's gonna have 2 fixed wheels on one side and 2 swiveling wheels on the other. Naturally, to accommodate for that swivel, the metal parts for those needed to be a whole lot larger. And after a whole bunch of welding and a quick dust of paint, they were ready to install. Now the machine was already sat on some adjustable legs, and I made these holders for the wheels in such a way that I could lift up the machine using the adjustable legs, bolt on my wheel holder contraption thingies, and then raise up the legs again so that the weight of the machine was sat on the wheels. Oh, and essentially the entire weight is sat on metal plates underneath those brackets, but so that those don't slip out from underneath the machine, they're held together with some M12 threaded rods. And I gotta tell you, the first time I tried moving the machine. I was pretty shocked by how easily I was able to wheel around this chunk of steel that literally weighs more than a ton. Now, it was a bit of a tight squeeze to get it in between all the other equipment and tools and out so that we could load it into the truck. And getting it into the truck was a little bit of a sketchy endeavor. We had to get a little bit creative in the way we loaded the machine into the car so that it could sort of wiggle its way in there. But once it was in there, I jacked down the wheels and the whole thing was pretty securely in place with a bunch of straps. And since this was already my second time moving a big lathe into this workshop, I already knew a little trick to get the truck to sit as level as possible with our loading dock. I made some blocks that I backed the truck up onto so that it would sit pretty much flush with the loading dock. And then with the help of a winch, we pulled the whole thing onto the ramp and right into the elevator. And from there, it was pretty much roll it right into the workshop. Or almost. There's only a tiny little problem left, and that is that this door is like that much too small. So I'm gonna have to take out both the door, the framing around it, and a bunch of drywall to even get a chance at getting it through the opening. Yay! Woo! Now that it's finally in the workshop, the question becomes, where do we put it? Now, the obvious answer would be to just replace this machine and put the new one in this spot. There's a few issues with that. For one, the new one is quite a bit larger than this one, so it would stick out a fair bit more, it would be a bit longer, but most importantly, it's quite a bit taller, which would mean that I would have to move this go-kart, and I just hung it there. I really like how that looks. In addition, in one of my upcoming videos, I'm going to completely transform this entire back wall of this workshop with a really cool idea that I have. At least I think it's really cool. So I'm gonna try and save some real estate behind me for that project. Instead, this is my plan. We still keep this corner as the machining corner, only difference is that instead of lathing there, it now goes here. That of course means that all of this has to go, and this is why it's so nice to have everything on wheels all the time. It still doesn't cease to amaze me that I, on my own, can move a machine that weighs more than 1.5 tons. It is quite large. Why did I buy such a big machine? Yep, I think that's it. That's where it will live. And with that new lathe now in its place, I haven't gotten rid of this one yet, which has meant that I've sort of had to reorganize a lot of this stuff. I don't love it, but there's a lot more change to come, so this will stay like this for now. So let's talk more about this lathe. But first, a quick ad for today's sponsor, Squarespace. So Squarespace is a huge part of the reason why I'm able to do what I do. Because the website where I sell my build plans and 3D files, alch.shop, is a website that I created using Squarespace. And I built that website using Squarespace long before they started sponsoring my videos. And you can start designing your own completely personalized website super easily using their new guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint. Choose from professionally curated layouts and styling options to build a unique online presence from the ground up, tailored to your brand or business and optimized for every device. So I pretty much only sell digital files, 3D models and build plans. But whether you want to sell physical or digital products, Squarespace has the merchandising features to make your products look their best online. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for growing your brand and building your business online. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/ALCH for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So what makes this machine so special? Well, it's a pretty interesting machine. Essentially, it's a CNC lathe built in the late 1990s. CNC means that it can be controlled by a computer. Late 1990s means that that computer was pretty slow. And getting that functionality to work today is pretty hard. In fact, I've tried a few times over the years that I had access to this machine at school and never really gotten it to work properly. And if that was the only thing this machine would do, to me, it wouldn't really be that useful. But the designers and engineers back then came up with something super clever that makes this one of the most capable manual machines I know of. because in addition to it being a computer control machine, you can actually also manually control these machines with these jog wheels that control both axes. Now that's super convenient because not only can you now operate this essentially exactly like you would a normal manual mill, lathe, like the one behind me, but you also get a bunch of additional features like being able to set the increments at which these move the bed, either in tens, hundreds, or thousands of millimeter. You get a power feed in all directions, infinitely variable, and relative to the speed that you run the machine at. Talking about speed, you also get a variable speed controller that will smoothly run the machine at 150 to over 3000 RPM. Now, all those features alone would make this a pretty capable manual lathe to begin with. But they've added a bunch of other really cool features. And there's 3 features especially, which would require an immense amount of effort or a specialized tooling to achieve with the manual lathe behind me that makes this such an incredible machine. And those 3 are threaded cuts, rounded cuts, and angled cuts. Now don't worry, I'm gonna show you how all of those actually work in action. Essentially, you can use the computer built in on the machine to, let's say, program whatever type of thread that you want. And it will just cut those threads for you. No matter if you want some super weird thread pitch or a fraction of a thread pitch or whatever you want to make. Things that not only require a whole bunch of skill with the manual lathe, but often also requires to change gear sets and a bunch of other things. Secondly, you can make angle cuts. What if you want a meter long 2-degree angle on a long table leg, for instance? Well, this machine can do it super easily, and it would be really hard to do it on one of those. And lastly, it can cut a radius. It can cut an external or an internal radius. It can cut a small one or a big one. It can essentially turn a ball. Definitely something that would be a bit tricky on one of the manual ones. But what fun is it to just show you a bunch of random cuts on the machine? Let's make something using all of those different techniques. And please don't hit me. One of the first things that I'm gonna make on this machine that is definitely meant for big, heavy cuts in steel and hard materials, I'm gonna cut a bunch of wood. Sorry. Let's start with doing something the lathe wasn't designed to do, but is really good at doing, and that is turn a square piece of wood into a round one. And one of the really nice features about this lathe is that you can set your X and Y axis coordinates based on the tool you got loaded in. You can then assign a number to that tool, which makes it super easy to switch between different tools and have the machine remember what size the cut is gonna be. Another really neat feature is that it actually remembers it even if you completely turn off the machine. And now, once we have our nicely round turned piece of wood, we are going to do something a bit unconventional. Drill and tap the end with an M8 thread. And here you can see the speed of this machine, or rather lack thereof. But what it lacks in processing power, it sure makes up in capabilities. Because here I've programmed an angled cut, so you can see that both axes are moving at the same time. I still have to move the tool manually to the starting position before I engage the power feed, and I had to keep doing that for each one of the passes. I'll also turn a slightly narrower section in the end, and we're on to the next piece. This one will start its life as 2 circles, which I've cut on the bandsaw and glued together. I'll put a hole in the middle, turn a sacrificial piece of wood down to the right size for that hole, and whack it into place. Don't think that's going anywhere. Okay, it's time for the interesting part. Pretty much maxing out the capacity of this lathe. This is gonna be fun. I think I'm gonna have the lid closed for this one though. And it didn't take long before I ran into the first issue. It's hitting down there and I have a little bit left. We'll just ignore that for now and continue on to the next part, which is also gonna be an angle cut. This time a really shallow one, and with the diameter of the disc being so large, the cutting speeds were getting quite high, and I was actually able to get a pretty good cut and some nice chips with the tooling that I was using. And the sharpest cutter I had was meant for aluminum. So a whole bunch of cuts and a huge pile of swarf later, I was actually able to create this long, shallow surface, and luckily in doing so, I removed enough material that I was able to finish the outside cut on the diameter. Now onto one of my favorite features of this lathe, which is gonna be a radius, and I'm gonna turn a radius to perfectly blend in the center section with the shallow angle that we cut. And with a quick hole in the center, we're done with this part for now, and we can chop off the sacrificial piece of wood that we glued in there earlier. And for the next part, again, I'm sorry, we're gonna turn a round piece of wood. But to make up for it, we're gonna do one of the coolest things this machine can do, which is cut threads. And on to the scary part. I think I programmed the threads as they should be. Let's just start. Fingers crossed. It's either gonna be a disaster or make some really cool threads. I think it's working. The thread might look really, really coarse right now, well, because it is, but there's actually gonna be a second one in the middle of the one it's making now. But first, it has to do this in 40 passes, and then it'll do the second one. Isn't this so cool? Cool? Yeah. Unfortunately, once the excitement of this cool new thing has settled, it's all about waiting as the machine does its 40 passes for one of the threads, and then you can see that it switches over and does the first pass of the next set of threads right in between the first one. After which you again get to wait for 40 cuts. It takes close to 20 minutes to run that program once, but it looks fantastic. Also, easily one of my favorite parts of this whole operation is the fact that once the tool is at the end of the thread, it doesn't need like a safety area or anything. It just pulls out perfectly every time. To finish this thing off, I turned a section that would hopefully match with the hole that we drilled into the big round disc that we just turned, because we're gonna glue those two together. And by hopefully, I mean I probably cut it a little bit or a lot too tight. It's through, but I can't get it any further, and I'm afraid to break it. So now it's a feature. I did manage to whack the end so hard that it got kind of busted, so I had to chop off the end, but now it looks just fine. I took that whole thing, chucked it back into the lathe, and cut a slight recess into the entire front surface that finishes off with a nice radius. Good luck doing that on a manual lathe. And just so you don't get too mad at me, here's some metal turning. We're gonna turn some parts out of brass. They are also gonna start their life with a hole drilled and tapped to an M8 thread in one end before they're gonna get parted off. I'm gonna chuck those back into the lathe on a threaded rod before, yet again, we're gonna turn a radius on the front. This time starting from the center, so essentially turning a half sphere. This again works in the same way as with the angled cuts. You simply move the machine to your wanted starting position, hit start, and it goes from there. So you manually control the amount of passes and the depth of cut. And the next operation is an angled cut, which happens to be the same angle as the long wooden parts that we just turned, that perfectly blends into that front radius. A bit of Scotch-Brite later, and these just turn out fantastic. And to finish everything off, a nice coat of protective oil on all the wooden parts. You can probably start to tell where this is going. I've made 3 of the brass parts, 3 of the wooden angled parts, this weird contraption, and the thing that's gonna tie everything together. I've 3D printed this part with matching threads for this one. Now at the end of these, into the threaded holes, I've just inserted some threaded rod, which now perfectly screws onto the brass parts. And just look at that matching angle first try. And this is like a super weird angle as well. It's like a 2.05 degree combined angle. Now this would definitely be possible on my other lathe. It would just be such a hassle because you could do this small brass part at this angle with the cross slide set to that angle, but the cross slide doesn't have enough travel for this long wooden part, so you'd have to try and do that in multiple passes, and it becomes a whole thing. Ba ba ba. So these really nice and snugly fit into the 3D printed part. And here I have to admit something. I did mess up one of these and cut the narrow section here too small on one of them. Luckily, this is 3D printed, so I just 3D printed one of the holes smaller. Now, these 3 go together, and surprise, surprise, this thing screws into the top. Isn't this so cool? Now, because of the really high pitch of the threads, it moves up and down super fast. And you know what? This little flat spot here, because I couldn't whack it in far enough to seat on the lip here, I think it's a pretty happy little accident. I think it looks pretty good. Now, what is it? My initial plan was for this to be a little stool to sit on. Now, I'm not sure if it's strong enough. And I think the weak link here is gonna be this 3D printed part. But let's find out. Okay, it does hold my weight. I'm gonna be happy with that. Realistically, probably not gonna use it as a stool. I'm thinking something to have like a flower pot on. Also, the solid brass bottom legs aren't necessarily the smartest thing to have on a wooden floor at home. Definitely not super well thought out. But I think it looks pretty cool, and it was a great opportunity to get to know the machine a little bit better and play around with all its cool features. Now, it can do a bunch of other stuff that I've never gotten to try out. I think it can like auto home different tools. It can do variable or constant cutting speeds. And I guess at some point we should try and see if we can get the CNC functionality to work properly. Also, and you're probably gonna get mad at me for this, the machine is still sitting on the movable wheels, so I can still like wiggle it back and forth. I know it's meant to be firmly on the ground and properly leveled and all of that. I just got so excited once I turned the machine on that I kind of forgot about it. And for the stuff I've made so far, it hasn't been an issue. Also, even though the machine for the most part is in great condition, there's this one thing that I haven't been able to figure out. It has this auto oiler, which is meant to automatically lubricate all the moving parts so that you don't get any unnecessary wear on the machine. Now, this container, when I got it, had a bottom cap that looked like this. So obviously it was empty, and I have no idea how long it's been like that. And even though that's a pretty quick fix, I haven't been able to get any sort of reaction out of the automatic pump up top here. So I'm afraid that that is gonna be a bit more of a project than just getting a new cap. Probably that's gonna mean getting into the electrical box, which means that I'll have to wheel the whole machine back out again. And that's why I've been a bit hesitant to put it firmly on the ground, on its feet, and off the wheels. Now, luckily, the machine has seen very little use over the last 10 years or so, and for when I've been using it so far, I've just been manually adding some whey oil. I also did a quick once-over on the entire machine, gave it some new grease, cleaned what I could, but other than that, it's basically just been plug and play. It's been super fun playing around with this machine, and there's so many things I'd love to show you. Like, for instance, the 4-tool tool changer, which can hold 4 of these holders. It also came with a flood coolant tank, which was super gross, that I had to clean, that I have yet to install. And also, if any of you guys know where I can get more of these holders or what they're even called, let me know down in the comments. Also, if you have some cool ideas for what we can build with this machine, put it down there as well. For now, thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one.